Obviously, today the Secretary of State making a ruling in regard to Measure 113 that would seriously impact your future. Can you just comment on that and what your immediate reaction is?
Well, it's not surprising that the Democrat Secretary of State, the Democrat Attorney General are covering for the Democrat Senate President who was unlawful and unconstitutional and uncompromising during the 2023 session, which led the Senate Republicans to try to bring them back into compliance with the law by pressing pause on the session. And then the Senate President made arbitrary and capricious and retaliatory actions by giving us unexcused absences for things that would otherwise be excused. So they really only have themselves to blame, and we will defend the constitutional rights of all of our members to have the free speech, to make sure that elected politicians are following the law and Senate rule and our Constitution as the people of Oregon would want them to.
You mentioned unexcused absences, things that would normally be excused. Can you give me one example of a day when you were charged with an unexcused absence that you feel like was unfair? Because I think from a voter's perspective, the unexcused absences are simply walking out.
Well, I'll do you one better. So many of us, including myself, had weeks in advance arranged for excused absences for work-related issues. Mine was a work-related issue in Central Oregon that lasted for 3 days. I was at the first day of that, which was excused, and I received an email from the Senate President rescinding the excused absences that he had already given me for those 3 days. And he made those unexcused absences. And that's why I said he's not trustworthy, because you got to be able to trust somebody and what their word is. And he even signed his signature to it that said that those were already excused. And then he rescinded those and made them unexcused. And that's why we say they're arbitrary, capricious, and that they're retaliatory.
Ultimately, how many unexcused absences did you end the session with?
You know what? I didn't even count it up, but I'm sure it was 20 plus. So we did. I mean, it was a 43-day walkout, but not every day was a session day.
20 plus. The way the Measure 113 was written, it would be 10. Were there really 13 or 10, 13, 14, 15 extra that you would say the Senate President used unadvisable discretion on, or are there actually 10 that are just a walkout?
Well, absolutely, because it's not just a walkout. The issue was the fact that the Democrats broke the law, and they wanted to continue to break the law. They want to continue to violate Senate rule, and they wanted to continue to be unconstitutional. We don't believe that the people of Oregon want that to happen. We believe that Oregonians want us to work in a bipartisan way and in a constitutional and lawful way to do business. The Democrats decided they weren't going to do that, and we literally were left with no choice other than to politically protest. And those are First Amendment issues, and we believe that those are protected speech and can't be unexcused absences, as the Senate President decided that they were, who is the sole arbiter of whether or not those would be excused or not.
Democrats are going to argue at this point, you're the one breaking the law if you want to run again, or any of your colleagues who want to run again who had more than 10 unexcused absences.
Yeah, we're not breaking the law. We are going to court to try to get relief in the courts, because we're clearly not going to get relief from the Secretary of State or from the Department of Justice, both of the offices held by Democrats. So, we expected a partisan slant to this, and we're going to go off the plain language of the ballot measure that says that we can, in fact, run one more time.
I think that no matter which side of the aisle you sit on, you can see a partisan slant one way or the other. People are going to make arguments. But what many Oregonians want to know is, what was the intent of Measure 113? What do you believe the intent was of Measure 113? Nearly 70% of Oregon voters voted for Measure 113.
To punish legislators for unnecessary walkouts. This particular walkout was necessary to bring the Democrats in compliance, again, the Senate rule, Oregon law, and the Oregon Constitution because they were failing to do so. And we believe that it was in the public interest, and we believe that we were defending the people's process in order to make that happen. And that was literally the only way we could bring them back into compliance.
Wouldn't every party argue that their walkout is necessary?
Well, they may or may not. I don't know what arguments have been made in the past. So I'm only focused on this particular issue because there is a consequence for the actions that we took. And we knew that there was a risk involved, but we also believe that ultimately the courts will rule in our favor.
I want to make sure I'm 100% clear about one thing, though. You would agree that voters were trying to set a precedent that nobody, Republican or Democrat, could have more than 10 unexcused absences and expect to run again the very next time they were up for re-election.
No, I don't think that's what the measure said. The measure actually says that it is the election after our term is completed. My term is not completed until January of 2005, which means the next election is 2028. That's the plain language of the measure, and that's what we're going to argue. Now, that may have been the special interests intent when they collected signatures, for which Rob Wagner was an endorser and a donor to that campaign. And then he became the sole arbiter of whether or not you got an excused absences or not. And, we believe that they were legitimate excused absences.
You understand when voters say that sounds like you're playing semantics. You're saying, oh, but my term ends right after the re-election, whether that's the letter of the bill, that the intent of the bill when 70% of Oregonians voted for it was to say, hey, you don't show up, you don't deserve to represent us anymore.
So the language in the Constitution actually matters. And that is the actual language that was voted into the Constitution. So while the Democrats and the special interests who paid to pass this measure might believe that they did something otherwise, the plain language begs to differ with them.
I believe what the Secretary of State said today, and I'm going to look over at my notes to quote this: my decision honors the voters' intent by enforcing the measure the way it was commonly understood when Oregonians added it to our Constitution. Should that common understanding be the rule of law, or should it be the semantics of the language?
It's not the semantics, it's actually the language itself. And everybody says that the law matters and words matter. And if they do matter, those words that are in the Constitution don't match with what was pitched to the people of Oregon through this measure by special interests.
Do you believe voters knew that at the time? Do you believe voters knew that you'd be able to run again if you missed 10 unexcused absences?
Here's the thing. If the question to voters was, should the majority do everything they can to make sure that the majority is acting within the Constitution, within the law, and within Senate rule, I think they would also overwhelmingly say yes to that. So nobody knew at the time that Democrats were going to willfully and wantonly violate Senate rule, Oregon law, and the Constitution when they passed this measure.
What if ultimately you go to court and you lose? Are you prepared to just gracefully step away?
Yeah, obviously the court is the final arbiter on this, and I will abide by the court's decision.
If you have to address a group of primarily Democrats tomorrow, and they say, "Hey, this isn't what we intended," I think everybody knew that. This is what the law says. How are you going to address them?
I'm going to simply say I did what I believed was the right thing to do, which was to defend the Constitution and our process, because literally that's all we have. If the majority is unwilling to abide by and live under the rules that they pass and the laws that they pass, then we don't really have a working democracy. We have anarchy, and we can't have that. And so I would do it again and defend the constitutional rights of the process here in the state of Oregon.
So much of your argument relies on the fact that you believe the Senate president violated their own rules.
I don't just believe it. they actually did. And the reason you know that they did is because they ultimately agreed to have a readable summaries on legislation at the end of session. If you go back and look, there were brand new summaries for every single bill. That is a recognition that what they did was wrong, even though they don't say that.
Was that a
So,
recognition, or was that a bargaining piece to get everyone back to the table so we got something done? I mean, I think
well,
both
we're gonna
sides can make an argument one way or the other.
well, we're gonna find out because the bills for the 24 session are going to need to be lawful, which means they're going to need to comply with Oregon law that requires them the summaries on bills to be readable.
Okay, anything else you would like to add?
No, thank you.
All right, thanks very much. Appreciate your time. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on more videos from Central Oregon Daily News. And for more news from the high desert, just visit centraloregondaily.com.